And with that, we'll kick it off. So before I show the first student video, we have Malcolm Goggin, who's the professor of the course that the students took this semester. So Malcolm can do a brief introduction and then I'll play the first video. Malcolm, take it away.
Okay, hi. Our class is 34 students. These are master's students who are in the last phase of their Master's in Public Administration program. The course is called the Capstone. So rather than working on one big group project, the 32 students and 34 students in my class this semester, each one is doing a separate individual project. And in this case, I believe there are 3 students that are working on Clarkdale. So we're going to see them today perform, and what they generally do is they end up writing a report at the end of the semester, which has an introduction, research questions, a lit review, methods, findings, and recommendations. Probably a 25 to 30 page paper, which is coming in right now at the end of the semester. So I'm looking forward to hearing the presentations of the students who are doing their projects on the city. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Gabriel Alvarez, and I am an MPA candidate in ASU School of Public Affairs. I've been working on the employee handbook review process with 3 other peers of mine to determine kind of best practices in HRM policy for the town of Clarkdale to consider. So moving on to our table of contents, it's kind of going to give a roadmap of where this presentation is going to go. So we're going to start with kind of a very brief introduction and background into the project, as to why we're doing what we're doing, empirical findings in literature that discuss general trends and various policy-specific focus trends in HRM literature. We're going to talk about the methodology of the project that was used, findings from the project, and then recommended policy implications to consider for the town of Clarkdale. So kind of an introduction into the background behind this project is that the town of Clarkdale is a small town in Arizona that has a very small staff size. And with that staff size, it kind of makes it difficult to make sure that policies and practice are 1, up to date, and 2, in compliance with state and federal legislation. The employee handbook in Clarkdale has not been amended since 2017, and this might be conflicting with 2022, as a 5-year time gap could have seen recent changes in state and federal law. And so the main concern of the town is to remain in compliance and in best practice. So they sought the assistance of 4 ASU MPA/MPP candidates to review their handbook and compare it with other municipalities in order to get kind of best practices to draw from. So going into empirical literature on general trends of HRM policy, we come across a couple areas. One of them being kind of what is the goal of human resource management policy? And the origins of human resource management policy date back to kind of 1974, where previous management strategies have prioritized administrative detail and workforce performance. HRM approaches the framework of management that employees are the most valuable resource that an organization can have, and when they are properly managed and stewarded, organizational success is guaranteed. So in a nutshell, HRM policy's goals are to kind of achieve desired employee behavior, because that desired employee behavior will help reach organizational goals. We see this operationalized in the public and private sector somewhat differently, but also somewhat similarly. The similarly aspect kind of comes from where it's going as far as achieving innovation. Both the public and private sector recognize that HRM policy is not necessarily stagnant, and that's something that you must continue working towards. And this means sometimes drawing from interdisciplinary frameworks, like human resource management draws from things like organizational behavior, organizational psychology, sociology, disciplines, and theory and understanding. It really kind of takes the message of do the best with what you have and what you can and try and improve. The real difference in name between private and public human resource management policy is kind of where they are set. Public focuses on what are public good organizations and how the policy might affect public good, and more private human resource management policies is more what's going to affect capital gain. Going into kind of comparative human resource management, which is what's going to kind of be, done in this project that I am discussing, is kind of aligning empirical research with practitioner goals. How can we operationalize findings and research that specifically fit the needs of a particular agency or organization? And this kind of comes into two best practice themes that we see in HRM literature. When it comes to HRM managers and stakeholders, how involved are they in the rule creation process? And then in the other theme is how involved are they in the construction of the definition of how those rules are actually complied? So these are two very important aspects and themes that kind of help set the stage for what HRM general practices actually are going to mean. Before moving forward, I just want to highlight my policy focus area. My colleagues have different areas of policy focus, but mine specifically for this project were appeals policy, termination policy, harassment policy, disciplinary action policy, and performance evaluation policy. Some best practices that were found in literature that were really more policy focused according to the themes that I'm looking at in this project had to do with defining and organizing work and forms of staff development in education and training. So defining and organizing the work is very important in HRM policy, especially when detailing that into an employee handbook, because things like job descriptions and work management are going to kind of communicate what are the problems or solutions that an organization is looking for, what's expected of an employee, and how are you going to be managed. These are very important when communicating kind of how you're going to accomplish organizational goals and how those goals are also going to benefit the employees as well, whether it be in the form of, the fiscal compensation of the job or even obtaining kind of organizational value, obtaining gratification through organizational values. Job analysis is also a very important kind of aspect to consider in HRM policy, because it kind of discusses things like, okay, we have these positions and they're meant to meet this goal. Is it doing that? Could it be done more efficiently? And do we need a separate position altogether to do this, or can this be shared among multiple positions? So job analysis is kind of, again, drawing from that innovation framework of, are we constantly doing the best that we can to meet our organizational goals in this job that we have here? Moving on to more staff development type of discussion in education and training, it's very important when considering appeals, termination, disciplinary action, and the policy of the like, if within my focus, that new employees and existing employees have these clearly defined. They're very kind of sensitive areas of policy in HRM. So making sure that new employees know when, how, and when and how to approach dealing with either policy compliance or operationalization in these areas is going to kind of reduce stress and motivate employees in the right direction of where they should go. For existing employees, it kind of sets a standard of, this is transparently what these policies mean and how we are going to expect you to comply with them and what it might mean moving forward. And then lastly, when it comes to kind of education and training, is talking about organizational values. It's very important for organizations to, when they're creating HRM policy, to make sure that their values have a part in the policy creation process. For example, if a organization values up-to-date and evidence-based practice, we want to make sure that policies that are implemented or being recommended kind of fit within that value, because it's also going to help employees who fit within organizational values kind of legitimize the policy that's set before them as well. So the methodology that was used in this is pretty simple, but not at all easy. It used a comparative case study research design that included 6 other municipalities to act as a comparison group for the town of Clarkdale. The town book was comprehensively reviewed by the town of Clarkdale's employee handbook was comprehensively reviewed by each of the ASU students within our respective policy focus areas. And the towns and cities in Arizona that were included included the towns of Scottsdale, Goodyear, Surprise, Oro Valley, Gilbert, and Chandler, Arizona. In my particular area, my case study included Goodyear, Gilbert, Chandler, Surprise, and Oro Valley, but Scottsdale did not have easily accessible or available information to me for my specific policy areas. So it's not going to be, it was not included in the findings for my specific case study. So the findings of the different handbooks within the different policy areas that I was assigned were many. For the purposes of this presentation, I'm just going to be kind of talking about some of the ones that kind of stuck out to me, but in the full report, there's actually much more detail than on the slide that you can see. So when it came to appeals policy, a lot of what I was seeing in the other handbooks was kind of examples of what appeal situations might include, kind of the timelines for how the appeal process should take, who's in charge of the appellate process for review, and different types of appeal eligibility and procedure for different employment types. Like a temporary employee's appeal might exist or might not exist compared different to a full-time employee's appeal. In termination, we saw a lot of areas, or in termination, I saw a lot of areas where there were discretion reducers, a lot of at-will employment status descriptions, who the authorized terminators of employment are, and employment verification policies. So kind of just, are you able to eligibly work in the US legally, and are you not? And what are the policies in place for that? In harassment, a lot of what we were seeing were required annual seminars in harassment, what was defined as protected retaliation activity to make sure that those who report harassment are not retaliated against, and very clear and concise definitions of harassments in multiple forms, such as physical, sexual, and emotional. In disciplinary action policy, we saw kind of top-down proceduring in these handbooks, so kind of detailing the disciplinary action process and defining different areas of disciplinary action. We also saw archiving of offenses in disciplinary action policy in these different handbooks, clearly defined disciplinary action enforcers, and disciplinary action remediation techniques. Lastly, in performance evaluation, we saw kind of more annual evaluation cycles, policies regarding employee recognition, defined ranks of performance, encouragement for self-motivated accomplishment tracking, establishment of performance goals, and those who had appraisal authority. So in this last little area here, I'm going to talk about some policy recommendations for the town of Clarkdale to consider. As I mentioned before, more extensive recommendations are going to be found in the report regarding these areas, but I believe that these are some of the more forefronting policy recommendations to consider. So in the appeals section of policy, I would urge the town of Clarkdale to consider finer detailing the appeals timeline compared to the handbooks that were reviewed. I found that the town of Clarkdale can do a more clear job of what that might look like for an appeals timeline based off differential employment type, and also to kind of clearly define in writing what is eligible for appeal and what is not. There were areas in policy where they were saying this might be eligible for appeal, but it wasn't really found in an appellate section so much as it was kind of mentioned in other areas of policy. Regarding termination, there were some unique areas I found in the handbooks that I think the town of Clarkdale should consider, such as establishing procedure for rehires. Seeing that the town of Clarkdale is a small town, the possibility for rehire is definitely there. And I think having a procedure for rehiring would be beneficial to kind of streamline that process, especially if they were not a terminated employee. Also, something that was pretty urgent to mention is the establishment of employment verification. I noticed that the town of Clarkdale's handbook did not have a real clear-cut policy on establishing employment verification. And this is important since federal law requires some form of establishing employment verification for employees in the US. Regarding harassment, it would just be to expand kind of harassment terminology. What does physical, emotional, or sexual harassment look like in the workplace? So much as just the punishment for it, but also establish a regular training in harassment to kind of act as a preventative measure for employees. prevent harassment in the workplace and prevent the the need for intervention. Disciplinary action policy had some very interesting ideas that led to these recommendations as well, such as listing specific causes for action. Some handbooks actually had as many as 37 in one handbook specific causes for action. Like if you do this, disciplinary action will happen. I don't necessarily think the town of Clarkdale needs 37, but having some general and mutually understood actions listed for causes for disciplinary action might be beneficial for employees to communicate, or for the employers to communicate to their employees. Also, I would suggest considering positive discipline frameworks. Some handbooks had this recommendation of writing these letters to HRM managers, where they would detail kind of the offense, the policy that they violated, actionable steps to avoid that in the future, and agreed upon disciplinary action should the policy be violated again. I think this kind of puts transparency and accountability in the hands of the employee, while also incorporating that kind of management supervision aspect. And then lastly, on performance evaluation, establishing actionable goals in the evaluation process is something I noticed in handbooks that the town of Clarkdale could grow from. I think it helps set employees up for the future in their next evaluation to kind of further organizational goals and practices. And lastly, to reward desired behavior, whether that be fiscally, culturally, and within the organization, it would be kind of up to the discretion of the town of Clarkdale. But I do think that rewarding desired behavior is going to help foster positive associations and ties within an organization. And with that, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation today. I really enjoyed this project, and I really hope that we get some meaningful and actionable policy here as a result of it.